The idea is that by just talking about the experiences with rematriation, that organically we can reveal something about rematriation practice as it's unfolding for us through the lived experience. Saludos and welcome to the Rematriating Borikén Podcast, where we discuss the journey to the essence of these islands, this archipelago and her surrounding waters, the restoration of our essence before conquest and continued colonialism, the reclamation of our collective healing and liberation. I am Yasmín Hernández, creator of CucubaNación, artist, writer, activist, born and raised in Brooklyn, Rematriating Borikén. I am officially in countdown to my 10-year anniversary. I plan my calendar. My calendar in my head is usually the moons and anniversaries or commemorations. Anniversary has more of for me, a celebratory connotation, and commemorations is just keeping these dates alive. So, for example, in April 19, 1999 was the day that a U.S. Navy pilot dropped 2 500-pound bombs on Vieques, but missed his target and instead dropped them too close to the observation point, killing Viequense David Sanes Rodriguez. And also, 2 years after, on that same day of April 19, his mother, Epifania, passed away. Those kinds of things that every April I am thinking of this day. Every April, I start with April 4, the day that the folks of the FALN were arrested in Evanston, Illinois, 1980, April 8th, within the greater Puerto Rican struggle is El Natalicio de Ramón Emeterio Betances. April 8th is also my son's birthday. It's the anniversary of when I became a mom. April 19th is David Sanes and his mother. April 21st is the passing of Pedro Albizu Campos. April 24th is the birthday of Mumia Abu Jamal, political prisoner from Philadelphia. April 26th is the birthday of freedom fighter Filiberto Ojeda Rios. This is how I live. This is how I greet my children in the morning. Today is so and so, and on this day in Boricua history, or what have you. So living this way, I am very attuned to the fact that living these cycles, I should say first, April 27th is the anniversary of when my brother transitioned. So April is very much for me a reflection of this constant cycling between life and living and celebrating, and between losses, some natural, some tragic, some violent, and just this meditation on life and legacy, life and legacy. With that said, I'm very much entering this countdown towards our 10-year anniversary of when we moved to Boriken in May of 2014. Things start to shift in this patterning to help me fall into this loop. The way that the weather changes, the coming of the rainy season, so the rain's already starting to arrive here in Aguada, in Mayagüez, in El Oeste, which is like some of the rainiest parts, man, besides being up in El Monte. And some of the things you also see, for me, what struck me so much when I moved was the abundance of de los mangose, like mangoes everywhere. There were mangoes, like in New York, you have the leaves in different colors that fall in autumn, and they just gather at the as cars drive, and the leaves just get pushed to the gutters, right? So each road is lined with like piles of colorful leaves. Pues llegar aquí a Boriken eran los mangoses, like piles and piles of little teeny, lo que dicen los tinos, los mangoses pequeñitos, los chiquititos, which are my mother's favorites. Those mangoes are small and they're very yellow, very orange, and they fall. They're like the first to ripen and the first to fall. So when we arrived in May, we would drive to Aguada and see piles of these drawings on the sides of the roads, like, yo, the abundance though, right? Like in New York City, it may be hard to come by a mango, or if you do, it's un poco carito y quizá feito. Here, it's like, yo, there's mangoes on the side of the road, and people will literally stop their cars and pick the mangoes up, but most of the time, like gusanitos have gotten to them, or hormigas. That was one of the things that first struck me in moving here. And the other thing was los flamboyanes that usually start to change in May. They're usually green year round, and for May, I guess the peak might be June to the summer. Son los flamboyanes cambiando colores, and in Aguadilla, there's just such breathtaking displays of flamboyanes from roads that are lined with una calle marginal que baja de la 107 hacia el Paseo de Aguadilla. And when we would go up or down that road to get to Camaseyes in Aguadilla, which is where our kids' first school was, that's why we came in May. Our child had just turned 5. We came in May to get here before the school year closed so that we can visit schools and find a school for kinder before that academic year ended. So we came in May and found ourselves with mangoes all over the place and flamboyanes in bloom going up that and down that road from Aguada into Aguadilla towards the school. These are just the memories. So as we drive around and we see this, we just remember. The other day we were at La Costa de Aguada. I don't know what people call it. It's like a paseo. Aguada tiene mucha costa. But where we were is actually where we drove down to the first day that we had arrived. And back then it had so many more palmas lining the coast. A lot of those palmas were lost to Hurricane Maria y la marejada que vino después, meses después de Maria, that really jacked up this coastline. And just remembering that, just remembering what it is to be in a place for 10 years, right? Humans are we're so transient, we're so migratory that for us to even commit to someplace 10 years is rare in these days. It's rare in the time of this heightened corporate capitalism and the inflation of, the real estate market and the displacement and gentrification and all of these things that we see happening everywhere. And so even in New York, knowing that there were certain communities that we came from that we could no longer live in, right, because of gentrification. I moved around as an adult, right? I went to school in upstate New York. When I left school, I went to Philly. After Philly, I went to Queens. In Queens, we moved around as well. Like, I didn't come back to Brooklyn, even though my mom was still in the same building up until she had moved here. So that building that I had moved into at the age of 8, that building was still the fixture. That was still home base. That's still where we all gathered on holidays and where I went to visit my mom's. Like, that was always the same. But when I did return to New York, I returned to Queens because whatever, like, it's not like this deliberate move of, I'm going to live here. You could try that. But any of us who have looked for places in New York City know that we are, tengo esta cita, voy a ver este apartamento en el Bronx, voy a ver este apartamento en Brooklyn, voy a ver esto en Queens. And you go hopping. And we even got to the point we were looking in Jersey, which we were like, what the hell? We don't want to live in no Jersey. Sorry. We are a Brooklyn Queens couple. That's where we come from. We were not intentionally looking to go to Jersey, but it was looking like that would have to be the possibility. And we ended up back in Queens, which is where Ivan is from. But to consider now that even though we have had to move here too, we are still in the same area. We arrived to Aguada, and then we now live again in Aguada. In between, we were Moca. Moca is what I call el nido, the nest. Moca is where my heart lives and will always be, I think. If I say I returned to the womb, Mocha was like that. She had that like incubator effect, right? Like this bubble effect. Like we went through some shit in Mocha, and that's where we lived through Hurricane Maria. But there was this sort of cushion that existed for us there that helped from the neighbors and the way the neighbors looked out to just the view, the land, the hill, the valley, like all of these things, the cows, the horses, like all of these things worked in tandem to create this protective bubble for our family. And I remember we're moving there when our children are 2 and 5, right? So in addition to arriving and going through the typical transitional shit that is traumatic, that is any number of things. It's how do you navigate those transitions? Y eso, como yo le digo, los cantazos y los cocotazos, while filtering them from your children, from your babies, and trying to make this transition as bump-free and boo-boo free for your kids, but you're all jacked up and mangled and shit from this experience. And so what you have is this constant juxtaposition between living through some shit and being nourished and being sustained and being replenished by something else. So for example, last night I was talking about some trials, right? Some things that I had over the course of life, like the typical things and losses of life that we live. And where do you get to that place that you can know that you rely on something that will always sustain you? And one of the things that I think sustains me always is, as an artist, that I always look for the beauty in everything, right? I'm always, stuff could be but ugly and awful in terms of situations, in terms of circumstances, and I'm always going to look for the beauty in it, which is to say, there may be something beautiful. There may be some aesthetic that I could find, like, oh, the aesthetic of darkness. Let's turn that into something. Or I'm looking for a lesson. There's something beautiful and powerful to be learned from this situation. Así soy yo. That's how I function. So as I'm meditating on this whole thing, I had made chia pudding, banana chia pudding for me and the family, and walking down the hallway to tell the kids, yo, come get your pudding. As I'm walking down the hallway, I see the back door and it's darkness, but it's black back there, right? Looking out into the backyard, it's nighttime. Usually by the time it gets dark, we'll close that door. And I'm like, oh, esa puerta todavía está abierta. Let me go close it. When I step out into the back, me encuentro. Well, first, it's usually, like I said, black out there, but because the full moon is approaching, I could see the palmas and I could see los guineos, la hoja de guineo all glowing, right? In this silver from the moon above. And so I step out my door, see these glowing hojas that kind of are like luring me, like, yo, don't just close the door, just pause and look out here. And I look and I see those glowing hojas. I look up and I see the silver stars of the Big Dipper, which is exactly what I used to see in that first house we arrived at in Aguada 10 years ago, the position of the Big Dipper coming back and cycling back like our ancestors to know what constellations are up or what time of year and what part of the sky. It's not something I ever did in New York. Aligning in that way, you align to the earth, you root to the earth, you align to the sky, you align to the cosmos, you understand its patterns and its loops. Y pues, that house, you used to step out the front door, and right above the front door was the Big Dipper. Well, now it's our back door. Our back door literally aligns with the rising Big Dipper. That's a question. Is it rising or is it setting? I have to look into that. But as I'm looking at these stars and I'm looking into this darkness, I see a luciérnaga. I see a lightning bug, which I don't see very often in this property. Sometimes I see them during the day. Igual que moca. I don't always see them glowing, but I'll find them in the day in random places inside the house. And I recognize what they are and I carry them out. I know how they fly, so I'll know it's a firefly. Catch it, take it outside. So to see it glowing right outside that back entrance, right under the Big Dipper. And I'm like, oh, how beautiful. And I start looking around y de momento veo como que 4 o 5 alumbrando. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. There's like a committee of these people. And so it struck me because it's not something I've ever seen on this property. Like, I don't think, it wasn't before the whole craze of West Nile Spring in New York that when I was little, we would see fireflies like that in parks in Brooklyn, like Lincoln Terrace Park. I remember a time we did a cookout there in the summer and my cousin and I were catching fireflies. Pero, you're not going to see this until you're like in some wilderness somewhere, but here in our backyard, de momento, por primera vez en año, me encuentro con varias luciérnagas así alumbrada. When I came back inside, I had this, because I started like a loca, right? Like, you still got to be New York about it. Like, oh my God, everybody, oh my God, we see the fireflies. And when my son comes out, ain't no fireflies, right? Like, and I'm like, why y'all making me look bad? Ustedes estaban ahí, lucía, y ahora sale el nene y se desaparecen. Like, what's up with that? And so I come back inside with this sense that eso fue para ti. Not to say it wasn't for my children. It was just like I was asking, what's that thing that sustains us through the hardship? What's that thing that sustains us through the challenges? What's that thing? If you're talking about looking for beauty in all things and that sustains you, how do you draw from that always so you don't fall into the funk, right? I go outside to close the door and the darkness is like, step out here. Invitándome. Y me encuentro con ese escenario. And it's like, you're romantic like that, right? Those are the places where I allow and I accept and agree and appreciate the romance. I think the importance is that these islands, this archipelago, this earth, I think it's Earth Day, either today or no sé cuándo, that I'm recording this, but it's all about equilibrium. It's all about striking a balance. It's all about the yin and yang, ¿verdad? El balance. And so it's like you can have that romance if you are equally willing to hold what is. If you're not using the romance para cubrir, para decir, no, eso no existe, eso no es así. I'm going to make it like this. I don't want to see things for what they are. I'm going to see it for this. And I think that it's like a seesaw. It's a constant juggle between knowing what is and never losing sight of what could be. Not what you want to take that thing that is and just like erase it and replace it with this right now. But you also do have to live with that vision of the possibilities so that you know what you're working for, you know what you're moving towards, you know what you're organizing towards. And so as a person who has named bioluminescence as my medicine, which is not to say that I've named it, I've recognized it as such. Something bigger, I think, has named it as such. And my first experiences with bioluminescence was as a child when I was like 10 in Lajas. And then again at 30, I think I was, in Vieques. And that was just like bananas, that experience. And so then after Hurricane Maria, I moved from like the water of the bioluminescent bays into these luciérnagas, which were everywhere. I did talk about, I don't see them like that. No, that from my childhood, fast forward to the months, the darkness after Hurricanes Irma and Maria, For us in Mocha was 4.5 months total. And in that time was when I was like, okay, fireflies, cucubanos, right? Like getting to know a different light of the night, of the darkness. I appreciated so much and was painting the light of our bays. And now I was being called to the one in the sky, right? That you look up at the constellations and there's a whole other terrestrial constellation being weaved beneath. And then if you're out in the bays, then you see another constellation being set up down in the water. And that is just magic. That's pure magic. And so it is a constant balancing between the colonial conditions that we are living and the way that I am reframing my own liberation practice and praxis. Is that before, when I was younger, I would always be so fixed on all the atrocities, all the historical violence and all the shit they did and all the shit they do and will do, right? And that was the space informing my activism. That was the space informing my art. That was the space that I moved from, and recognizing that that's reactionary. And so since moving here and just being able to experience more intimately the way the pulse and the ritmo, right, de esta tierra, de sus aguas, de los cielos. Cuando hablo de ritmo, when I talk of these patterns, when I talk about these loops beyond anniversaries, beyond commemorations, it is recognizing those patterns in the sky, right? Like, why do we call them los tres reyes? Because they're going to disappear for some time. And that constellation, Los Tres Reyes, or aka Orion's belt, is not going to be visible in our skies again until right before the holidays, right before Christmas. Understanding the patterns and that was our ancestors' calendars. The equinoxes, right? Understanding I can perceive here the axis of the earth based on the relationship between the full moon and the sun. Where the full moon rises and sets, where the sun rises and sets, because those two will mark that straight line. And you can see, I know where to look for the sunset. Certain time of year, that sunset's going to be straight ahead, or go slightly south to where they said chill is off the coast of Aguadilla. Then towards the winter, when you're getting closer to the winter solstice, and you want to see that sunset, you got to look all the way down the coast because it's going to be hella south. And as we approach again, the summer solstice, that sun is going to go traveling up the coast of Aguadilla, right? It's going to be heading back north, recognizing that axis. That's our shift, right? That is how the earth is tilting. That tells us where the sun is going to rise, where it's going to set, and the time of year that it does. Yo creo que en el alinearme con las conmemoraciones, los aniversarios, is also, that was prior to my being here and being so attuned to the cosmos, a los elementos. That is how I could live these cycles in my body and my system, right? The tides and knowing these things. People who fish, people who plant are very aware of these motions, of these patterns and loops. And so, yeah, this is how it feels. It's not just unique to here, it's also unique to the experience. It's actually accessible and available to anybody who listens with their heart, with their eyes, with their mind, with their ears, who listens with the cells in their body, so that when I was a pregnant woman anticipating my birth in early spring, I was aware of the snowfalls and how they tapered. Había un gallo in Queens that would hang out in everyone's backyards. Y él cantaba por las nevadas. Y cantaba ronco. El gallo estaba ronco. It would be so cold that his song was all jacked up and it was hoarse. And I remember listening and connecting to that gallo because I already had this anticipation of wanting to be here in Boriken. I wanted to be elsewhere. But it also helped me connect to nature. Between the snowfalls, we would call it the fireball, we had a little glimpse of the horizon from our window and we could see the sun just as it was rising. And what we also had on that block next door, there was a husky dog who would howl like a fucking wolf. Y entre esa cosa, my pregnant body would feel connected to some other greater rhythm and pulse. And I gave birth in the spring, and I was very aware of that rhythm, right? So there's something about the shift from winter to spring, those first warm days, that I would feel myself like swelling fertile and shit, like the earth, and falling into that rhythm. Right? So all of these things shift. Like now this time of year, those mangoes are going to start rolling down the street and those flamboyanes are going to start flaming red. And that is, I know, the cycle of when this land received me. Thank you so much for listening to the Rematriating Borikén Podcast. This is Yasmín Hernández. You could look out for future episodes every new and full moon, or around every new and full moon. Some of these will be reflections as audio recordings. Some of them I may be inspired to make actual video podcasts. Others will have other voices represented or other interviews with folks. Stay tuned and find out. Thank you so much for listening.